Imagine you're walking down the street and you notice a man walking down the sidewalk on the other side of the street. Pretty soon, a second man comes up behind the first man, and after a brief interchange, the first man reaches into his pocket, pulls out his wallet, and hands the second man a $100 bill. Then the two men turn around and walk away in opposite directions. The fact of what you've seen is that $100 has changed ownership from the first man to the second. You saw the heart evidence. There's nothing to dispute. But is that enough really to understand what just happened? Let's add the story so your heart can understand what just took place. What if I told you that the second man was a robber? That when he walked up, he told the first man that he had a gun in his pocket that he was going to use if the man didn't give him all the money in his wallet. Now, if the first man was a multimillionaire, he probably left the interchange more annoyed than anything. But what if I told you the first man was down on his luck? He'd been without a job for months and was down to his last $100, which he had just withdrawn from the bank. In fact, he was on his way to the pharmacy to pick up some medicine for his little girl. And what if the little girl wasn't just sick? You learned she would die if he didn't make it home with the medicine. Now your heart is beginning to understand the full picture and weight of that brief interchange. Now let's change the story. What if the two men were old friends, and the second man had called his friend earlier and asked if he could borrow $100 to fix his car so he could get to work? And what if, when the first man handed his friend the $100, he told him not to worry about repaying it, that it was a gift? On the other hand, what if the first man had been the one who had borrowed money and was just repaying his friend? In all these scenarios, the fact remains, $100 has changed ownership from the first man to the second. But the real measure of what just happened, the essential part, is found only in the heart and can only be understood by the heart. The same $100 that generated fear, anger, despair, and sorrow in the first scenario produced gratitude, love, relief, and joy in the second. Our eyes saw the fact. Our hearts grasped the truth. The fox and the little prince got it right when he said, "Only the heart sees rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye." Or, if you remember Virginia's letter to the Chicago Sun asking if there really was a Santa Claus, in part the answer was, "The most real things in the world are those that neither children nor men can see." What causes more pain? A broken leg or a broken heart? I'll come back to that question in a minute, but what I'm really here to talk about is education. And if you're listening to this, I suspect you have children you care about very much. You want the best for them. But what's your idea of best? I read a recent survey that asked the question, "What's the purpose of education?" and 365 respondents came up with 365 unique answers. So before you go any further, it only makes sense to tell you my answer. I believe the purpose of education is to prepare children to live lives of maximum joy, and that has everything to do with the heart. I see the problem with today's education is that we've been so worried about training the mind that we've left the heart behind. The mind feeds on facts and information, while the heart feeds on impressions or feelings. It's more practical for schools to focus on the mind because they can create minutely detailed curriculums and lesson plans around facts and information that can be tested and measured. Ask a child to identify plot, setting, or character in a book, and you come up with a measurable score. But ask him how a story makes him feel, and there's no way to assign a score. In fact, feelings often can't even be expressed in words. The money givers and lawmakers demand measurable outcomes, which can only happen in the world of facts and information. We also lean towards facts because we can use them to compare our children. You know, my 2-year-old can count to 127. How high can your 2-year-old count? And we allow those comparisons to make us feel like successes or failures. Yet, wouldn't the more telling question be, whose 2-year-old is happiest? We use the word academics when we talk about the kind of learning that takes place at school. We teach historical dates and memorize state capitals. We administer tests on the periodic table of elements and make sure our kids know the planets in order. We generally have a favorable impression of academics, so it may be surprising to hear the definition of academic as found in the online Merriam-Webster dictionary. Quote, having no practical importance, not involving or relating to anything real or practical, having no practical or useful significance. And we're calling for more rigorous academics. We want to extend our school days and school years so there's more time for academic learning. We want to start academic learning at earlier and earlier ages. That just doesn't make sense to me. As I said before, I think our schools are in trouble because we've left the heart behind. Only the heart can give value and meaning to facts and information, just as I demonstrated with the story of the two men. Learning without the heart is like a lifeless body without the spirit. Emotions come out of the heart and set us in motion, like the proverb says, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. In the Bible, when Jeremiah looked around at the destruction of his people who had been so highly favored, he cried out, "The whole land is made desolate because no man pays attention to heart." It's our emotions that make us feel alive and make life worth living. So what I'm about to describe to you is how we educate the heart in childhood. Children feel before they can think. It's the natural order of things, and by following the order of warming the heart before we train the mind, a lot of the frustrations children face in learning will be lessened or erased. The ideas are not my own. I discovered a circle of warm-hearted educators and storytellers who lived about 100 years ago. For the last several years, I've been studying their wisdom in the books they left behind. They left so much of their hearts in their writings, I feel like they're my friends, and I often find myself referring to them as such. Their writings have enlarged my soul, elevated my mind, and enlightened my understanding, and I'm anxious to share with you what I've learned. They saw this shift from heart to mind taking place in their day. They talked about it. I think they did their best to keep it at bay, but in the end, the mind has won out, and their lessons on heart education have been buried. We're experiencing in our schools the consequences of choosing this mind over heart path. The remedy isn't to run faster in the same direction. The remedy is to go back to the fork in the road and choose to take the path we abandoned. I don't know all the answers or applications, but I invite you to be part of laying a new foundation of learning, or rather restoring a foundation that's been neglected. First, let me introduce myself. I'm Marlene Peterson, founder of Libraries of Hope, and although I earned a degree in child development and family relations, my actual learning has taken place in the laboratory of my own home, where my husband Brent and I raised a family of 9 children. Like my husband always says, all of them are boys except 8 of them. Our children fall within an 11-year span, so I know what it's like to have lots of little ones underfoot while tending to their needs under waves of nausea, with a husband who has to be gone long hours to provide and still never having enough money. We've weathered the crises of broken bones and broken hearts, which, by the way, as to the question I posed earlier, my experience is that broken hearts hurt much more than broken bones and take much longer to heal. As I make suggestions to you, I will keep all these things in mind. We've public schooled, charter schooled, private schooled, homeschooled, unschooled, and done combinations of all of the above. If your main concern is finding the right path to get your children into college, from my experience, any of them will be just fine. At this time, none of these choices will close the door to the opportunity. Where there's a will, there's a way. All 9 of our children graduated from various universities, with several pursuing advanced degrees. But that's not the concern of this presentation. I mention them, though, because there are those who will reject a philosophy if they don't see how it will increase test scores and directly affect the chances of getting into college. Let me assure you, nothing that I present will take away from these opportunities if that's important to you. The ideas I will present can be used no matter what your choice of schooling is for your children. They'll provide a necessary balance if your children attend school outside the home. You just won't have the luxury of as much time to implement them as someone who chooses to homeschool. But homeschooling's not an option for everyone, and I'm very mindful of that. Because I know you're busy, I've weighed out the best way to share these thoughts with you. I thought of writing a book, but if you have lots of little ones, finding uninterrupted time to sit down and read may pose a real challenge. So if you'll allow me, I'd like to come along and visit with you while you're folding your laundry or doing dishes or cooking dinner or driving to soccer practice and music lessons. I've posted a page of resources I'll be mentioning so you can go back and find them easily later. You'll be happy to know most of these resources are free. The one talk you might want to sit in front of your computer for is the one on art, so you can view the works of art as I talk about them. I recommend that you listen to these in order, starting with the presentation of Sandcastles, Diamonds, and Singing Songs of Joy. This is a keynote address I gave at a couple of conferences this spring, and it lays the groundwork for why all of this really matters. Then I'm going to introduce 7 basic principles of a heart-based education. The heart responds to different languages than the mind, and I'll take each of these languages one at a time and talk about the importance of each one, and then give you practical, useful ways you can apply them in developmentally appropriate ways. Specifically, I'll be talking about music, art, particularly the visual arts, poetry, and story. Then I'll share some thoughts on the importance of the Bible in a heart-based education. No matter what your religious belief, the use of the Bible is critical, and I'll explain why. Then we'll move on to nature, God's university. Opening a child's eyes to really see the world he lives in is the first step towards a love of science. After that, I'll recommend some ways to manage and organize a heart-based learning style in your home, and I'll show you many resources available for your use. The next presentation has to do with helping children retain more of what they're learning. Many homeschoolers use notebooking, and this will address using notebooking with a heart-based slant. Then I'll share some resources I've put together that can be used if you should choose to join with other families and start story clubs as a means of giving your children more incentives to learn and read. Even if you choose not to form a club, I think you'll like the resources I've pulled together. And then finally, some concluding thoughts. I hope these little talks will open up new possibilities for you, and that as you apply the ideas, you'll share your experiences and successes with others. That's why we've set up a private group Facebook page that I invite you to join, which will also provide the easiest way for me to share new resources and ideas I come across. I hope I've piqued your interest and that you'll allow me to share these ideas with you. I'm so impressed with the level of dedication and the creative pool of talent I see in young mothers today, and I hope that what I have to offer will be a blessing to your homes and your families. Thanks for taking time to listen.